Mark Regev, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you for having me.
As we just referenced in the story before, the Prime Minister gave an answer to a question about what will happen in Gaza after the war. He said this: "I think Israel for an indefinite period will have the overall security responsibility because we've seen what happens when we don't have it." Does that mean that the IDF is planning for a long-term military occupation of Gaza?
We don't want to govern the Gaza Strip. We don't want to rule over its population. On the contrary, we're looking together with others, other contingencies which will allow Palestinians to rule themselves. But it's clear you have to differentiate between political control, which Israel does not want, and a security envelope, a security situation where Israel can protect itself from terrorism. And of course, that will require some sort of presence. It doesn't necessarily mean a permanent presence. We can go in and we can go out. But after what Israel went through on October 7th, a month ago yesterday, it's clear that we're not going to allow terrorists to reestablish control in Gaza. We're not going to allow them to build capabilities that can inflict the sort of pain that they did on us just 31 days ago.
Well, let's try and understand what you mean there. And you use the phrase security presence. And you've said before, I think today, that you use the phrase there will have to be an Israeli security presence. So you've said it twice. Those are your quotes. Are you talking about fortified Israeli military bases in Gaza?
I don't think so. Don't forget, you're talking about a very small area. I mean, Israel is smaller than the state of Victoria. I think you can fit 11 Israels into the state of Victoria. And so we're a small country, so I think we can protect ourselves very well from our own borders.
Well, then,
I think the Prime Minister was talking about...
Sorry to interrupt you, but let's just be very clear, because he said overall security responsibility. You're talking about an Israeli security presence. Presence means being there. How else can you interpret those words?
No. Once again, I said in my remarks a second ago that we could have a fluid situation, that we can go in and out as need be. But it's clear that when this is over and Hamas is destroyed, we won't allow a residual presence or a presence of terrorists to build up again. We've been through that, done that, and we don't want to go there again.
But let's be clear. Are you talking about an Israeli presence in the Gaza Strip after this conflict is over?
Once again, I think we have to be fluid. We have to think creatively. We have to think of a situation where we can deal with serious security concerns when they arise and not just lift our hands and wait to be attacked. But I don't think, once again, we don't want political control. We don't want to rule over Gaza. On the contrary, we're already talking to friends and allies about working with international partners, hopefully with Arab states as well, to help rebuild Gaza when this is over. And what we want to see is a demilitarized post-Hamas Gaza. That's ultimately, Sarah, going to be very good for the people of Gaza. Hamas has been ruling the Gaza Strip for 16 years, and what have they bought the Palestinians?
We'll come back to the...
It's a point that has to be made, Sarah.
I understand.
What has Hamas bought the Palestinians? 16 years of hardship, of pain, of bloodshed, and, of course, impoverishment.
I understand.
Surely the people of Gaza deserve better.
Let's stick with the topic at hand, if we could, and I'll come to the idea of working with an Arab force with this in mind. But you're using the word fluid, which isn't clear by any means. Now, you already have a model for this potential idea that the Prime Minister raised yesterday in the West Bank, where you keep Israeli military bases while allowing the Palestinian Authority to have a semblance of control. Is that what you're talking about for Gaza, something like the West Bank?
I think, to be fair, the West Bank is divided into three areas. There's Area A, which is under full Palestinian control. There's Area B, where there's joint control. And there's Area C, largely unpopulated, which is controlled by Israel. That's part of the Oslo agreements.
Yes,
so it's true, some of those arrangements could be an example of what we would like to see in Gaza, but it's clear. We can't, after going through all this, we're not going to allow a resurgent terrorist movement to take over the Gaza Strip. That has to be clear.
Let's be very clear about this. You're talking about a situation in Gaza after the conflict that in some way resembles the situation in the West Bank, where Israeli military are able to intervene throughout the West Bank at will.
To protect lives, to prevent the sort of slaughter that we saw on October 7th. We don't want to see our children massacred again. Is that not a legitimate desire to protect our own people?
Nobody wants to see anybody's children massacred, but you are talking about an occupation. That is, the rest of the world
No,
sees
I disagree.
that. Well,
I disagree.
The rest of the world sees what is happening in the West Bank, and we've seen since the events of October 7th the intervention of Israeli soldiers in the West Bank. Lives are being lost. You're talking about recreating that situation in Gaza. In what way does that differ from an occupation?
Sarah, I would like to be able to send a letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations and say, please demilitarize Gaza, and it would be done the next day. But in the real world, that's a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. Israel has to destroy Hamas. It has to dismantle its very formidable terrorist machine. And when that's done, we have to ensure that it doesn't regrow again. We've experienced too much blood from our own people. And this has to be done. It has to be finished. And we want to see a new relationship between Israel and Gaza, not one based on conflict, not one based where Israeli parents have to fear terrorists crossing the border at night and butchering their children. We won't stand for that any longer.
You mentioned before that you were hoping to work with Arab forces after the conflict. Staying with this idea that you're talking about setting up an arrangement that mirrors what is currently happening in the West Bank with all of the problems that has. Do you think that if that is indeed Israel's plan, that any nation, any Arab nation would agree to take part in a peacekeeping or stabilization force if Israel intends to occupy Gaza?
Once again, I know the situation on the West Bank is far from perfect, but you've got to ask what the alternatives are. And if the alternative is a Hamas-controlled government, I'll take the imperfect reality on the West Bank. That has to be clear. But to answer your question directly, we are in contact directly and indirectly with Arab governments across the region. They are no fans of Hamas, and it is my understanding that in creating within an international framework a new reality in Gaza, when this is over, there will be Arab partners.
Are you suggesting that Arab partners would tolerate an ongoing Israeli military occupation of Gaza?
I never use that word, ongoing Israeli military occupation. That's your word. I think Arab partners will be eager to help the Palestinians in Gaza rebuild their future in a more peaceful reality with Israel. I think we will find Arab partners in that effort, yes.
One of the most controversial features of your occupation of the West Bank, and to be clear, that is how the world regards the situation in the West Bank, is that you've allowed Israeli settlements to expand into Palestinian territory. Can you offer any guarantee that the same thing wouldn't happen in Gaza in the circumstances that you are describing?
Yes, 100%. There's no Israeli intention to re-enter Gaza. We left Gaza in 2005, as your report said. We took down all the settlements. We took out the settlers, those who didn't want to leave, we forced out. And what line did we pull back to? The 1967 line. Now, we have no intention of resettling the Gaza Strip. That's not on the agenda. But I think this is also very instructive, because we're told by many people sometimes that all Israel has to do for peace with our neighbors is to take down settlements and go back to the 67 lines. Well, we did that, and the response was Hamas and terrible, terrible violence. Clearly, solutions have to be based on reality and not on myths, not on dreams.
Let me just ask you this question. As you know, President Biden has very clearly warned it would be a big mistake to occupy Gaza. Are you prepared to ignore the advice of your closest ally?
I just said repeatedly, we have no intention to reoccupy Gaza.
And yet, what you have just described is a form of occupation.
I disagree. Once again, I don't accept your classification of wording. What we'll need is a security envelope to make sure that terrorists in Gaza will not attack and kill Israelis. We've been through that. We don't want to go through it again. We don't want a situation where rockets are fired from Gaza on Tel Aviv and literally millions of people have to run to the bomb shelters. We want a peaceful relationship with Gaza. And we will not allow terrorists, after we have defeated Hamas, to reestablish control of the Gaza Strip. It's basic self-defense. We will protect our people. We will not allow them to be butchered again by these terrorists.
A number of senior Israeli politicians say Israel must, well, they were saying this up until now, I think, up until the Prime Minister's interview yesterday, Israel must commit to peace at the end of this war and a return to the two-state solution, along with its campaign against Hamas. Doesn't this plan of an ongoing security presence make that impossible?
I disagree, because when there were negotiations for peace with the Palestinians, it was always discussed that the Palestinian entity will be demilitarized, and that's what we're talking about here. There was always talk about Israel having the ability to defend itself in the framework of dealing with extremists, even in the framework of a peaceful relationship. But everyone talks about the Palestinian Authority as a peace partner, and I understand that. But the fact that 31, 32 days since the terrible massacre, the failure of the Palestinian Authority to condemn Hamas's massacre of our people, to condemn the rapes, to condemn the beheadings, to condemn the burning of babies alive, to condemn the mass shooting of the young people at the music festival. What sort of peace partner refuses to condemn that sort of violence?
And just very, very briefly, is this something that has been raised in any way with the Palestinian Authority, the idea of an ongoing Israeli military presence in Gaza?
Once again, we will take steps to safeguard our people and protect our people. That's natural. I think our conversations with the Palestinians, there are direct channels of communication. And of course, we have friends who are shuttling between us, ourselves and Ramallah who can pass messages. But it's clear in any new reality, Israel will not return to a situation where we have a terrorist enclave on our southern border and our people in southern Israel live in fear, yes, of terrorists crossing the frontier and killing them, killing their children. It's just not going to happen. Anyone who wants to build a better Gaza has to factor in that justified Israeli request, that justified Israeli demand. We will not go back to the morning of October 7th.
Mark Regev.
Pure and simple.
Mark Regev, thank you for coming on and explaining more about what your Prime Minister meant last night. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.